Hello and welcome to the Door to Door YouTube channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about garage door springs. Probably one of the most important part of your garage door. It's actually what lifts and lowers the door. The spring acts as a counterbalance, and as the door lifts, the spring releases tension till the door is open and the spring is fully relaxed. And then as you lower the door, the weight of the door puts tension back on the spring. So then when you go to lift it again, you're able to lift it. Without the garage door spring, you're basically going to try to be deadlifting the entire weight of the door, which in most cases is going to be a lot of weight for most people. Without the garage door spring, basically, you're going to have a wall. So the spring is one of the most important parts of the garage door, and it's probably our most popular or common repair because they are designed to wear out over time. With metal fatigue, your average garage door spring should last about 8 to 12 years based on usage. Normal usage they consider is open and closing your door in the morning when you go to work, coming home, open and closing it one more time to put your car in. So some families that use the garage door like their front door will find that they'll be replacing springs a little bit sooner than some families that may not use the garage doors often. So I always tell people age and use is really what is involved in how long these springs are going to last. There are two main types of springs, one being the torsion style, which you'll see on a bar above the front of the garage if that's what you have, or there's also the extension style spring, which will run along the sides of the garage door up above the tracks. So depending on how your garage is set up will depend on what type of springs that you have. Both have their pros and cons. With the smaller doors, you still see the extension springs a lot. Rarely you're going to see these with the bigger doors. And then the torsion springs you'll see just about on anything. But let's dive in a little bit deeper first with the extension spring. With the extension spring, coil, loops on both ends. One end's going to hook to an eye loop near the back of the track on the back hang. The other one's going to be connected to a yoke and pulley that has a cable that runs to the front and then down to the bottom of the garage door, so that way it can help lift as it pulls as the door closes and puts tension on the spring. So when you're ready to lift it, it's going to relax that tension and allow you to lift the door. You know, these springs, they are color coded. So this one you can see is yellow. That means that this spring is rated for 130 pounds. So based on the color, there's industry standard on how much this door should weigh. Some older springs, some different companies got cute, do some different colors. But for the most part nowadays, the color codes are going to match up pretty well as to knowing what weight spring is on a door. So when we come in to do a spring repair, if we're not familiar with the door, not sure, we can always look for the color-coded end to make sure when we change the springs, we put the right spring on, because they do come in different weighted increments for the door, so it can be almost an exact match to the weight of the door, so it's properly balanced. A garage door that's properly balanced should go up by hand, nice and easy, come down the same way. You shouldn't have to be struggling. You shouldn't feel heavy. You shouldn't want to fly out of your hand. If that's the case, then you have the wrong spring. Nice thing about the extension spring is a little bit less expensive to replace compared to a torsion spring. Also, too, that lets you let the door go on level just a little bit. So if you have a crooked floor and you're trying to still get a good seal on it, a lot of times these will allow the door to go a little on level to kind of make up that gap where a torsion door really has to stay level to work properly. So that's one little advantage you have with the extension spring. So we still do a lot of these. You do have to lift the door to spring the extension spring doors without any springs on it. So you basically have to deadlift the door, which could be anywhere from 100 to usually about 150 pounds. Over 150 pounds, you usually don't go extension springs. Unless there's a reason you can't do torsion, which is the next spring I want to talk about a little bit more. But all in all, good solid design that we still do a lot of. Next I want to talk about the torsion spring. So this is a similar idea. It's a coil, except this one's going to turn rather than pull with tension. So when the door is down, the spring is wound up in full tension. And then as the door lifts, it's going to release the tension and allow you to lower the door. So when the door is full open, again, like the extension spring is going to be relaxed with no tension on it. or very little, just enough to keep the cables on the drums. They have cones on either side. One's a stationary cone that's going to bolt to your center bearing, and the other one is the winding cone with little holes for your winding bars that we use to wind the spring up to the proper tension to lift the door. They come in left hand and right hand wind, which is basically how the spring winds. So when you turn it and it releases tension. So depending on, a lot of doors will have two springs, so left hand and a right hand wind on either side. Some will just have one. So in most cases, if it's just one spring, it doesn't matter unless there's an obstacle or something and you have to slide it over and just need the room to get the spring on and mounted depending on the header and where you're actually able to mount the springs securely and safely, because they do need to be mounted into something solid above the door, just because there is so much tension on it. You don't want to see it rip out, which I have seen and can be very dangerous if they're not properly secured and they do rip out of the header. It causes a big nightmare. We have to come fix it. You don't want that. Interesting thing to note with the torsion springs is they have 3 numbers on them typically. This one only has 2 just because I know it's a 2-inch spring. But they're going to have the wire size, which this one is 243, and the length, which this one is 30 1/4, and a 2-inch spring. So this one on a standard like 7-foot tall or 8-foot tall door is good for about 130 pounds. So if it's a 130 pound door, chances are the spring will work out, or 2 of them. If it's a double door, that's coming in around 260. Nice thing about the torsion spring too is you can also high cycle it. So as I said, with the extension springs, they're made to last about 10,000 cycles. With the torsion spring, a standard one for most residential doors is going to be made to last about the same, about 10,000 cycles. But what you can do, if you're one of those families that uses it like your front door or in and out, or in commercial applications where the door's opening constantly all day, we can get what we call high cycle springs, and that will increase the cycles depending on some factors you can change. You can go bigger wire size, you can go for a thicker diameter. And so there's a couple different ways you can change these springs out to get you more cycles so the spring will last longer. Usually with a bigger spring, with higher cycles, it ends up being a little bit more money, but if you're one of those people, again, that knows that you're going through springs every 3 to 5 years because you're using the door that often, it might be a good idea to look into it and see. Basically what we do is we calculate the spring, as long as it's the same IPPT, which stands for inch pounds per turn, and that's basically how much tension is it releasing off the door as it comes up, per turn on the spring. So as long as that's the same, it means it's lifting at the same weighted rate. So you can change these in and out, different wire size, different length, as long as you're keeping that the same. To get more cycles, or maybe you don't have that much room, you need to fit it in a tighter space, so you need a shorter spring, because as they get shorter, they get stronger. As they lengthen out, they get a little bit weaker, but then usually at that point, then you're getting a little bit more cyclage out of it. So there's a lot of different things in factor with these that you can do to get exactly what you want out of your spring. Some pros and cons with the torsion spring is, one, it's a little bit safer than the extension spring, because when these springs break, you'll get a little crack in the middle here when they break, but it's on a bar above the front of the door, so it can't go anywhere. Where the extension springs, we do run a safety cable through them, so if they do break, they should stay held up in the air with the safety cable. But when these springs go, it's a lot of tension, and those safety cables can break. So it's not 100% where these on a bar, it's not going anywhere. So these tend to be a little bit safer, a little bit smoother, and the nicest thing with the torsion spring is you can wind it from the ground with the door closed. So that means, unlike the extension spring, the door has to be lifted to be sprung. This, you can spring from the ground. So for a heavy door, always going torsion. Main con is you need a little bit of room above the front of the door. So if you're in a situation with like a low headroom, not a lot of ceiling clearance, these might not fit. So there's tricks, there's different ways to do it to try to make them fit, but if you don't have the room, then sometimes it's easier or better just to go extension if you're dealing with a very low headroom situation. But for the most part, torsion spring is a good solid way to go. as far as a spring system goes. So that's basically it. Whether it's torsion or extension, both are tried and true spring systems that we use every day. Depending on your garage and your setup dictates exactly what spring system we would recommend or consider that you use for your door. Or if you have a current spring setup that you just need the springs replaced, now you know a little bit more about what you're looking for when it comes to getting new or replacement springs for your door. But please leave any comments below if you would like me to elaborate a little bit further. This is just a very basic overview of springs, garage door springs, for you to kind of get your head wrapped around exactly how they work. So please like, comment, subscribe, and see you in the next one. Okay, thanks. Bye.